All right. Let's see. I think we are live. Hello, everybody. Let's see if this is working correctly and that I got the new microphone set up correct. Excellent. Well, hello, friends. Welcome back to the SerenityOS office hours, our weekly live stream where we talk about anything you want to talk about. And we're just going to keep going with the same usual format. So you ask the questions and then we dig into whatever you want to look at. But I guess we'll start by just saying hello to everybody. Nice to have you here. I hope everybody's been having a good week. All right, so we're starting out with a very specific question right away from Enderish here. Saying, hello, Andreas. I was watching your hash table video from last year yesterday and really enjoyed it. I looked over the implementation a bit and I had a few questions if that's okay. That is definitely okay. This is why we're here. In hash table rehash, why compute new capacity as line 375? Why does kmalloc good size just return its argument? All right, let's take a look at that. So hash table rehash. I haven't looked at this code for a while, so let's reorient ourselves. So what are we doing here? Computing new capacity here. Why kmalloc good size just returns its argument? I think kmalloc good size is it's kind of a platform abstraction. So on some platforms, you can ask the malloc implementation, hey malloc, if I were to ask you for 12 bytes, how many bytes would I actually get? Because malloc is often implemented in a way that rounds up the number that you ask for. So say that you ask for 12 bytes, it actually gives you 16 bytes. And it's useful information to know that even if I ask for 12, I'll get 16. So we try to take advantage of that information by making ourselves aware of the fact that we have 16, not 12 bytes. And we use that in, I think, vector and in hash table to just make use of any extra capacity, because our capacity growth function, as you can see here, we have some kind of, wait, let's see, how do we grow the capacity in this guy? Oh, right, so when we grow the hash table, we simply grow the capacity by 2. And say that you ask for 128 bytes, but if you ask malloc, it says, oh, well, if you ask for 128, you'll actually get 160. We might as well make use of the extra bytes that we get. So that's what this is about. And then if you see an implementation of kmalloc good size that only returns its argument, it's because it has not been, like, it needs to be implemented, basically. So I don't know where that is. My find in files is not working at the moment. But it needs to be implemented somewhere probably. So let's see. Git prep kmalloc good size. Kmalloc. No, that's not what I wanted. Oh, this guy right here. Okay, so this is in the kernel. In the kernel, kmalloc good size just returns the size because it's not sophisticated enough to round up to the size you would actually get. So that's essentially, that's like fix me, round up to the actual good size. Yeah. And then what do we do in libc? I think in libc we have a function called malloc good size, which correctly looks up the allocator that would be used for this size, and then this is an out param, so we get the good size that the allocator would use. So in userland libc client code, we would get the correct behavior. So the thing you're asking about is specific to the kernel where this is not implemented. I hope that answers the question. So Valtteri was asking, do you want to show off some of the SMP fixes you've been working on, maybe? Sure, why not? So let's get a 686 build, and then let's see, how do we do this? Yeah, we just run with SMP enabled. And actually, we have to do a little hack to get the SMP fully running. So we have to go in the kernel scheduler and turn on this define here, because otherwise the scheduler will not put threads on all CPUs. It will just put all threads on the first CPU. So we have to go in here and set this. And this is just while we are still bringing up SMP support. We only schedule on CPU 0 by default. So let's run with that change. And the SMP fixes I've been working on have been like really low level and hard to kind of show off. And also, did I actually manage to? Maybe I didn't rebuild correctly here. The SMP fixes I've been working on have been primarily like deadlock fixes due to bad lock ordering and like misuse of atomic exchange APIs and things like that. Bad caching in the message allocator that we use to send messages between CPUs. So like a whole bunch of things that don't really translate to a demo, just bug fixes. But I guess I should be able to show you that we can run on 2 CPUs at least, which if you look here, we are. So, and there we have a hang. Oh, no, wait, it woke back up. Okay. I thought maybe we had a deadlock. So usually it's now at the point where you can run for a while and you get random hangs and locks. And if you have a lock that lasts more than, I don't know, like 4 or 5 seconds, then it's probably a deadlock, and you can attach a debugger and try to work out, well, why are we deadlocked? And then take it from there. And there's a lot of issues that need to be tracked down and figured out. But it is more stable than it ever has been. So that's really awesome. And I think for anybody who's interested in working on this kind of thing, I would say it's now like approachable enough that you could learn a lot about this by helping out with this stuff. If you're interested in like low-level kernel CPU integration type stuff. So let's see, more people showing up. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. Let's see. Neil is asking, how does Serenity deal with or plan to deal with driver compatibility? We don't really have a plan for anything. That's kind of part of our way of doing things, is we don't make plans. We just let people work on whatever they find interesting. And it's been working really well so far. But specifically about drivers, really, my expectation is that people who want to run Serenity on their hardware will write drivers for their hardware. I don't think that that writing drivers for hardware that you don't have is it's not very motivating work, not very interesting work. At least not to me, so I don't do that. But we'll see how things develop, you know? And certainly if, you know, in the imaginary future, we would get to a point where I would be able to say something like, hey, if you send me that Ethernet card that you have, I can write a driver for it. Maybe that's an interesting thing to do someday in the future, but we're certainly not there yet. So at the moment, people just write drivers that they need. So let's see. S. Salur, I do not know how to pronounce this name, Pasa Sioglu, asking, wouldn't you consider combining Serenity with Amiga OS? I don't even know what that means. Would I consider combining Serenity OS with Amiga OS? In what way? Let's see. Oh, Benjamin Phelps with the super chat. Thank you, Benjamin. Good to see you. saying, thanks for being awesome, Andreas. The rest is on PayPal. I guess I gotta check my PayPal. Thank you very much, Benjamin. And with the characteristic winking face, of course. Really appreciate the super chat and the PayPal donation. Let's see. Infinite Jets is asking, I was wondering if you could talk about the pre-C++ part of the boot process. I cannot figure out how to load my kernel to high memory and would love to see how you did it. Thanks. So our boot process has been undergoing some interesting changes lately, but one thing that's important to know about Serenity is that we do not implement a bootloader ourselves. So we rely on the presence of a multi-boot compatible bootloader like Grub or the thing that I use day to day, which is the built-in multi-boot support in QEMU. So when I'm running Serenity like this, I'm just using the bootloader that's built into QEMU, which is, as far as I know, the fastest way to boot a kernel in QEMU. At least last time I messed around with this, it saves more than a second per boot. And as somebody who boots the system more than 100 times every day, those seconds add up. So I try to, I like that we have a setup where we can optimize the boot time. It makes development more fun. But the pre-C++ boot part in Serenity is nowadays, it used to be just a single assembly file that was part of the kernel, and then it would just set up the initial state of the paging registers, page tables and stuff, and then jump to the C++ init function. But nowadays, we actually have a pre-kernel environment, which is used to boot the kernel. So our multi-boot stuff is in the pre-kernel environment. It's in kernel, pre-kernel here. So we have the multi-boot headers in an assembly file. We have a little boot assembly. And then what the pre-kernel does is what I just described. So it runs a little bit of assembly to set up some initial page tables and stuff. And then we jump to long mode, I think, if we're on 64-bit. And then once all that stuff is set up, then we want to go into the pre-kernel. And so the pre-kernel was written by Gunnar, so I'm less familiar with it. But the basic idea is that we load the kernel elf here, and then we can jump into it. I think really, like, to help with your issue where you're struggling to get the initial stuff set up, it would be better to look at the Serenity repository a couple of months ago where we just had a boot script in the kernel directory. So let me do that real quick. If I just clone Serenity older, I'm just gonna, I know that there are many ways to check out a branch. I just don't want to mess with my repo. So let's go before the pre-kernel. So like right here. And then we can, oh wait, this is still, oh, I wanted to go even, okay, just a moment. I'm searching through the Git history. Okay, here we go. Git cleanup is not a thing, right? So finally, we can find our old boot code. So we set up our kernel to, using the linker scripts, we set up the kernel to have a boot code at the start of the kernel executable. And we put the boot assembly there along with the multi-boot header. And then it's just a like a short assembly program that sets up page tables and then jumps into C++. And really the trick is to do the page tables like you do temporary page tables in assembly. You don't have to like keep using those page tables forever. I think that's a mistake that many people make. They think that, oh, the page tables I set up in the boot code, I'm stuck with those, but you can just swap them out for other page tables later. This old boot.s, go and check it out in our old version of that. It's quite understandable. I know 577 lines sounds like a lot, but it is very understandable if you are comfortable with assembly. Let's see. Dither8 saying, "Hi Andreas, any component of modern desktop Linux you like Wayland, Pipewire, and Flatpak?" I mean, I like some parts of modern Linux, I guess. But I don't know. I don't know which one I would say. I like the point that hardware support has gotten to in Linux, because it used to be like a big joke, right? Like, because I grew up using Linux in the 90s, and then in the aughts, and it used to be like you couldn't buy hardware and have any expectation that it would run on Linux. And the other day I bought a cheap drawing tablet so I could learn to draw for streams like this and stuff. But I'm still learning. But I bought a cheap tablet and it just works on Linux. So I was impressed with that we've gotten that far. Let's see, I'm running behind a bit here. So let's see. Valtteri is asking, did you get a softbox or are you bouncing off the wall to get even lighting? I don't know what a softbox is, and I also don't know what bouncing off the wall means. So I am unable to answer the question because you're using terms I'm not familiar with. Matt Stir is asking, "Hey Andres, could we look into how kernel panics work? Does it need to allocate memory for the tracebacks/panic messages?" Great question. Let's look at panics. So panics are in panic.h, and we have the big panic macros here, which is just a simple thing that calls __ panic with the current file and line context, so that you get a pretty thing, like a pretty printout of where exactly you panicked. And as you can see here, it calls this thing called critical demessage line, which is a special version of demessage line, which is akin to debug line, but it ends up in the demessage buffer. So just like Linux and other Unix systems, we have demessage buffer. So if you run demessage as root, you see kernel messages, right? And critical demessage line is a special version of this that is not supposed to allocate. So it should be usable even if you're unable to allocate memory. So it uses like static buffers. And that's an integral part of its design, because if panicking had to allocate, that would make it hard to panic inside the allocator, for example, or while the allocator is in a bad state. So the function panic itself is very simple. It just calls critical demessage line to print some stuff, and then dumps a backtrace and then kills itself or shuts down the CPU. And Valtteri with the cat dog super chat. Yes, cat dog. Let's bring up cat dog. Actually, I had cat dog on my desktop as well, on my host machine. So let's take a look at cat dog. Beautiful. Thank you for the super chat, Valtteri. Very good. Let's see. Lebster is asking, are the desktop shortcuts still broken? They're broken? What does that mean? So these appear to be working. I don't know what that means other than that. So if you have a specific bug in mind, then we can take a look at it. Jim and WTB asking, have you ever looked into the UEFI boot process? I haven't really looked into it other than being frustrated with it as a user. But I recognize that it's something that we would probably have to support eventually for some machines. But just like I was saying about drivers, I prefer that somebody who needs it implements it instead of I'm not a big fan of people sort of making a list of technologies that happen to exist and then implementing them. It's much preferable to me that people implement things that they need for their machines, so that they are motivated directly by having that type of machine. So anybody who needs UEFI to run on their hardware, I'll let them do it. Vitz Lab saying, what is the purpose of drivers? I guess the operating system slash BIOS sees a new device somehow. Is there a common metadata protocol which tells operating system device vendor IDs? Well, yes, sort of. It depends on how your device is attached to the computer. So if you are attached on the PCI bus, for example, then you learn the PCI vendor and device IDs by talking to the PCI bus. And if it's connected via USB, you learn that same type of information by talking to the USB controller. And you know, same basic concept for other buses. So it is the case that you learn some metadata about what kind of device it is, but after that point, you're a bit left on your own because the device will only tell you what it is. And in some cases, there are some devices that follow kind of standardized protocols. I think, for example, human interface devices, like all USB mice and keyboards, are supposed to behave the same way, roughly. But for more complex random devices, they might have their own custom protocols that you need to implement a driver for. So the purpose of a driver is really to speak to hardware in its own language so that it can understand what you want. And then to abstract that so that it looks like a generic device from the user's perspective. Anil Kumar is asking, can you please give a brief code tour of HTTP and TCP implementation inside Serenity? Absolutely. So the TCP code in the kernel starts in the TCP socket class, which inherits from IPv4 socket, which in turn inherits from socket, which in turn inherits from file. So as you can see, it is a classic Unix design, and that sockets are files, and IPv4 sockets and TCP sockets are socket files. And basically, the TCP implementation is spread across two files. So a lot of the outgoing code is done by TCP socket because when you want to send out packets or send out data on the socket, you talk directly to the socket file. But when data comes in on the socket, that comes from the outside. And then we go through this thing called a network task, which is a thing that runs in the kernel at all times. And it's it's a kernel process that's started at boot and is responsible for decoding all incoming network packets. So today it implements IPv4 and a bunch of different protocols on top of that. So like the basics like ARP and ICMP, or the ARP, IPv4 are the two ether types that we implement. And then if we look into IPv4, we handle ICMP, UDP, and TCP here. So this is all in networktask.cpp, and you can follow along how it handles TCP packets if you just go look at handle TCP. Essentially, we decode the packet, figure out, oh, this packet is for this TCP socket object that we are tracking here, because all TCP socket objects are kept in a global socket table so that the kernel can always match an incoming packet to a corresponding socket if we have one. And then the network task updates the state of the TCP socket so that we end up in the right place in the TCP state machine. And I don't love the way that this is spread out across two separate files. It would be nice if the TCP protocol would be entirely kept in one file somehow. But, you know, there are many things that would be nice, and it's yet another thing on the Yak stack. But yeah, so that's how that works. And you can look at those things. And then you also asked about HTTP. So HTTP is implemented we have a libHTTP, which has a class called HTTP request. And what you do is you, let's see, if we look at, we usually do our HTTP through this service that we had called the request server. So when you want to send out a query over HTTP, you don't speak HTTP directly, but rather you talk to the request server over IPC on our machine. And then what you do is you call this IPC protocol called start request. And then you just send your HTTP request method, URL, any headers that you want and stuff like that. And then it takes care of that internally. But the implementation of HTTP is all in libHTTP. It has HTTP request, HTTP response, and then the big workhorse class is called HTTP job. And an HTTP job represents the execution of a request and the eventual transformation of that request into an HTTP response. And the code is a little bit generic in order to share logic with HTTPS, which of course has a lot in common with HTTP. So it can be a little bit hard to follow if you don't know that. But I recommend that you go look at HTTP job specifically if you want to learn more about the implementation. Okay, let's see. Uno Qualquera 6 saying, hello, how complicated do you think it would be to adapt Serenity to run on a mobile device? Let's say an Android smartphone, for example. I have no idea. If you figure that out, I would love to hear about it, but I have not done any such investigation, so I don't know how to answer that. German WTB says, hardware support for Linux will probably always be better than Serenity. Possibly, but never say never. Let's see. David Isaacson asking, why is the content in the macro in panic.h wrapped in a do while 0? Okay, so let's talk about that. So this is kind of a old trick in C programming where say that you have a situation where you want to panic. Let's panic in the network task, for example. So something bad happens, and then I want to panic. Now, imagine that the panic macro expands to multiple lines of code. So that it would, instead of this, let's make our own macro here. Let's call it panic with a K. And then we remove the do. And then you can probably figure out what's going to happen here. So this part will be executed if something bad happens. And then this stuff will always be executed, even if something bad did not happen. So that's obviously not what we want. So in order to avoid that, we wrap it in a while loop that never repeats. And that's just like an old trick that has been used in a billion code bases to do that. Let's see. Simon Holm is asking, hello, I was looking into some of the ACK files and I noticed that all .h files ends with using ACK : X. What is the rationale behind this pattern? Just undoing the namespace or something more? So let me show you what that's about. So for example, at the end of the vector header, which puts a vector into the ACK namespace, we bring it into the global namespace by saying using ACK vector. And what this achieves is that it allows us to link with programs that have their own vector without colliding with them. So our vector is always called ACK vector in the generated code, but we can refer to it as vector in our own code. But if we build a port, many ports have, for example, a class called window or widget or vector or string. And we don't want them to get confused about their string versus our string. So we just put our things into a namespace, and then for our own convenience, we yoink things into the own namespace. Or into the global namespace, rather. Let's see, Abhishek saying, do you mind giving a high-level overview of how the GML and CPP files interact with each other? In the sense, how does CPP file know about buttons, inputs, etc.? Right. So how, if you write some GML, so say that we have some GML, I guess we can go and just find some GML that we're already using, like the browser window, very simple, right? So this is the main UI of the browser application, has a horizontal separator up top to separate the menu from the tab widget, and then just a tab widget on the bottom. This is the main UI, so everything else happens inside that tab widget. And as you can see here, we name the tab widget. We give it the name property. And the way that C++ interacts with the GML is that it uses these names to look up the widget. So let's see if we can go and get the browser window. So we look for tab widget, the way that it, yeah, so here is where we reach into the generated UI. So first thing we do is we create a main widget for this browser window. Then we load that UI from GML. So this is GML source baked into our program. And after the load is done, we search through the subtree of widgets now within our main widget, looking for a widget with the name tab widget. And then we provide the specific type that we're looking for here. And it gives us back a pointer to that widget, which we then assign to a pointer where we keep it. So this is how we reach across the C++ GML boundary by just searching through the widget tree for a named widget. So these names are, that's the whole reason that we have names for widgets in GML, so that you can find them from C++. Let's see. PMH Pereira asks, how is the compiler able to understand that something SV is a string view and not a string? How is this technique called? So it's called a user-defined literal. So I think, I forget how it's typed out exactly, but here in stringview.h, we have operator quote quote SV. This is how it's implemented. So you can define these to create any kind of literal that will then produce whatever type you want. And it's really, really neat. So let me get Firefox. It's user-defined literal in C++. Although I think that SV specifically is part of STL, which we don't use. So we provide our own SV, because I think usually user-defined literals have an underscore and SV doesn't. So there might be some little difference there I haven't looked closely at. Anyway, you should be able to figure it out based on user-defined literals. And Yanis Adamek with the super chat, thank you very much, saying, hey Andreas, could you quickly explain the pattern? Have a nice weekend. Thank you for the weekend wishes. Let's find the pattern. So the is, it's the Singleton pattern, which is a very, very old object-oriented programming pattern, which people have different names for it, but basically the point of the pattern is that you have a single instance of a global object, And then instead of creating new copies or new instances of that object, everybody just wants to access that one instance of it. And some people call it like instance, some people call it singleton. In Serenity, we call it the, because it's the virtual file system. There's only one virtual file system object. You cannot create more of them. So it's the virtual file system. And it's kind of, you can think of it as a way to gather global variables inside of a class. Let's see. Andre is asking, hey Andreas, thank you for your great content. Oh, thank you for watching it. Do you mind explaining the relationships between model and view in libgui? E.g., who owns what and how they relate? Okay, so the GUI abstract view is the base class of all views, and the basic idea is that the view owns the model. And models are reference counted, so they can have multiple owners. But every view, when you assign a model to a view, you're assigning it through a reference counting pointer. So the view, every view that views a model has shared ownership. So the model can never go away while it's attached to by a view. And of course, you're free to own the view outside of that as well. But that's the basic concept. And then the data inside the model is completely managed by the model itself. Like the model, it's the responsibility of the model to manage the data. And this is something that is actually improving quite a lot recently with the merging of a bunch of new functionality for GUI model, where previously there was no way for models to communicate incremental changes to its data. But thanks to a lot of hard work by Synac, we are now starting to get these incremental update APIs for models so that they can communicate to anybody who's interested that, oh, this little thing inside the data is moving in that little way, which will then make us able to make more granular invalidations of GUI widgets and stuff. But who owns what between the model and view? Really, like the view owns the model, and the model is really an interface, and it's the model itself is sort of a view on top of whatever data you want to display as a model. So we have models that expose, for example, the DOM in the web browser. So if I click on inspect DOM tree here, I get a tree view that displays the DOM, like the document object model. And this is a model that is sort of a thin wrapper around the actual DOM representation inside libweb. We don't duplicate the DOM inside of a model, but rather we create a model that then wraps the DOM. And that's what I mean when I say that ownership is like up to the model, because the model is more like an interface. Yeah, if you have a more specific question about some situation, it might be easier. So let's see. Daniel Shaleshnov asks, is there documentation for libgui widgets? There is no direct documentation unless you see some documentation. In general, our widgets behave very similarly to Qt widgets. So if you're familiar with Qt programming, then you will find yourself right at home here, other than the absence of signals and slots. Let's see. VitsLab is asking, is there a SerenityOS roadmap? There is no roadmap. There is no plan, no roadmap. And once everything reopens, do you plan on giving talks about Serenity at tech conferences to spread the word? So I don't, like I always say, I don't have a plan for anything. But I can tell you that I have been invited to a whole number of tech conferences, and I've decided to not speak at any of them this year because I'm still um, like figuring out a lot of things about how to run my one-man business and things like that. But definitely next year that might be interesting. So we'll see. It I have a bit of I struggle a little bit to see the reason for me to go and speak at conferences about Serenity because it seems to me that people find this project even if I don't advertise it so much. And I worry that if I were to advertise it more heavily, we would attract a different type of people. And I like the type of people that we're currently attracting by just focusing on the technology, focusing on the work. Um, so, but I'm definitely open to new experiences and new ideas. So we'll see how that goes. Let's see. Manuel asks, what is the name of the SerenityOS equivalent of Spotlight? That would be Assistant. It's right here. If you hover over it, you can see it says Assistant. And we bring it up and we say Assistant. And indeed, this is the thing, bin assistant. Let's run it, and it brings itself back up. It's called Assistant, and it was initially implemented by Spencer Dixon, and then a bunch of people have worked on it, including myself. And there's still a bunch of things that need to be done. The results are, there's something wrong with the scoring of the results, or it's certainly not always ranking like the most intuitive thing at the top. So I think we need to work on that. But I'm really happy with the progress of this thing. Lappy. Yeah, cool. Also, it has a bit of a flicker, which I think we can get rid of. It's just a problem with the asynchronous updates of the GUI. Anyway, let's see. Jeroen asks, hello, Andreas, how are you doing? I'm doing great. I think I'm doing great. I had a very bad week video production wise because I recorded 3 videos this week that I had to throw them all away because I made stupid technical mistakes that made the recordings unusable. And I was very, very frustrated with myself for a while there, and was really, really happy when I eventually managed to set everything up correctly and record. And the new microphone setup is the reason that I was messing around with everything and the reason that I kept screwing it up. But I think it turned out pretty good. So, I mean, I think the new microphone setup has turned out really good. I hope that it sounds good to you too. Let's see. Clinton Programs says, I don't know much about windowing systems, but looking at Serenity's Windows server, it seems much simpler than Wayland and X11. Why are implementations of Wayland and X11 so much more complex and large? Right. The reason that they are more complex is because they support more features and more types of hardware, and they also integrate with like GPU acceleration models. We have a very simple rendering model at the moment, so that allows our Windows Server and compositing system to be very simple. As we expand, it will become more complex, but I don't think it needs to become as complex as something like X11 or even Wayland, because we have a very specific idea of what we want to do here, and that allows us to build very targeted solutions instead of very generic ones. So I am optimistic that we could add more hardware support without like disproportionate complexity, but you know, we'll have to see how that actually pans out in reality, because in theory that should work, but in practice you never know. Let's see, RMCF asking, what was the most fulfilling job you had before working on Serenity full time? Oh, the most fulfilling job. I would have to say probably like the middle years of working at Apple, because in the first 2 years I was not productive enough to feel good about myself, and in the last couple of years I was like going in a downward spiral of getting really tired of that environment. But those middle 3 years or whatever, when I was extremely productive and doing really strong performance work on WebKit and Safari, was extremely fulfilling. And I loved every year when we would put out a new iPhone, and I was always reading the Anand Tech reviews where they would like review the benchmark scores of like Safari on iPhone JavaScript benchmarks versus other high-end phones, and we were always like way ahead of the competition on everything, and that's the stuff that I worked on, which was really fun. Let's see, Manuel asks, does Assistant have access to the menus or other functions of any application, or vice versa? Can any application integrate with Assistant? So Assistant is a standalone application at the moment, but it has a sort of a modular architecture, if you will. So it's an architecture of what we call providers. So if we look at provider, if I can spell correctly. Right, so you create a subclass of provider, and then you implement this one API called query, where you get this string input, and then you return at your leisure. So it's asynchronous. You return a vector of results, and then you can put whatever you want into these result objects, and then we will present them in the UI. So it is theoretically possible to add any kind of provider and implement any kind of integration with that. But it is not expected that applications themselves plug into the assistant, but rather that the assistant plugs into the applications through providers. If you wanted to do something like menus, like integrate with the menus, you could do that by doing IPC with Windows Server. So menus are currently managed by Windows Server, so you would have to create a provider that asks Windows Server questions and presents the answers in some meaningful way. A nice introductory provider for somebody wanting to build something for Assistant could be, for example, to add currently open windows. So you could type the window title of a currently open window, and Assistant would find that window and allow you to switch to it. That could be done entirely with a Windows Server provider. So Paul is asking, what have you worked on today before the stream? Before the stream today, I've been working on the profiler. So after the last video, I've been continuing to work on the signpost mechanism and refining the way that profiles are parsed and stored in memory, because as I work with larger and larger profiles, I start to notice that the profiler itself gets very sluggish. And it is always funny to me when performance tools have bad performance. That's something that there was an endless source of frustrated amusement for me while I was working at Apple, because their performance tools like instruments.app have a lot of performance pathologies, let's say, and I would often frustratedly mutter things like, maybe the instruments team should use instruments. But now that I have my own profiler that I've been working on, um, I have to, put my money where my mouth is and actually use it on itself. So I'm trying to do that, and it has a lot of dumb stuff going on, like it does a lot. It's like stringly typed events, for example. It's something that I fixed up yesterday. So we used to store the profile event types as a string and then compare against the string every time that we were iterating through the list of events, which was just stupid. So now we store that as an enum instead, and just things like that. Let's see. Daniel with the super chat. Thank you, Daniel. Saying, hats off to you. I just get overwhelmed by you just speaking about the operating system. I can never understand how you do it, but thank you for everything you did. Thank you for the super chat. I think I'm very, very immersed in this. And if you get very, very immersed into something, eventually it stops overwhelming you. And don't underestimate your own ability to immerse yourself into something. Because if you want to, you can get to the same place. Not sure if everybody wants to be in this kind of extremely immersed place, but I enjoy it. Saeed saying, hi, hello from Sweden. Big fan of SerenityOS. Do you use GCC for compiling the code? Yes, I'm currently using GCC. Most people are. We build a copy of GCC as part of our toolchain build. And we recently have been adding Clang support. So we now have a nightly build of Serenity with Clang. And that has been really, really interesting because it exposed a lot of GCC isms that we were relying on, or like things about GCC that were kind of things that GCC would like turn a blind eye to, but Clang wouldn't let slide. And now that we have a Clang build, we are forced to do things correctly. So that's been really positive. But it also raises a lot of questions about like continuous integration infrastructure and stuff like that, because it is expensive to maintain multiple builds. So we can't really afford to run both on CI continuously, at least. But I think if the Clang build becomes nice and stable, then it seems realistic that maybe some people would prefer to use Clang for their daily development. Let's see. Victor saying, hi, what's going on? Hello, Victor. We are having the weekly SerenityOS office hours live stream. That's what's going on. Welcome to the stream. And Ali is asking, did I just spy a type ID operator equals? I don't know. I don't know what we're supposed to be looking for. Type ID. Providers. Oh, look at that. Yes, that is a type ID operator equals. Interesting. Seems like we do have that, yeah. Manuel asking, with regards to tracing tools, are you familiar with About Tracing in Chrome? Yes, superficially. I am more familiar with the equivalent tracing tools in WebKit developer tools, the web inspector tools. But I have some familiarity with the Chrome tools as well. And very early on in Serenity, like in the first, I don't know, the first 7 months or so, one of the early contributors built a profiling mechanism where we didn't have a profiler, but the kernel would dump out a file that we could load into Chrome's About Tracing interface. And we used that to identify some of the early scheduler problems that we had, like in the very, very early days. So I've also used About Tracing for that. But not since then, actually. And it was really fun. It was fun to navigate a profile of Serenity's kernel in that interface. Let's see. Jacob saying, as a kid, I used to love playing the desktop destroyer game, and now thinking about hacking together a similar type of program. Is it possible for a GUI program to get information about other programs? Yes, it is. So there we have a concept called window management, and it's not super fleshed out, but it is the mechanism by which the taskbar program learns about other windows. So the taskbar that you see down here on the screen, it's able to like switch the active window, and it notices if a window changes title, for example. And it does all this via the window management protocol, which is a separate IPC protocol that Windows Server provides. So Windows Server has two IPC endpoints. If you go and look in temp portal, you can see that we have the window portal, which is the general Windows Server that every GUI application connects to, but we also have WM, which is the window management IPC portal. And you can learn about various things about other windows, and it's something that we could expand to support more access to more information, because at the moment it's kind of organically grown API that just supports whatever taskbar needed. If you want to build Desktop Destroyer, I have to look up what that is because I don't know. What is Desktop Destroyer? Let's see, Desktop Destroyer game. Oh, this looks sophisticated. Okay, well, you can definitely do this with some combination of like taking a screenshot maybe, or I don't know, but yeah, there should be some way to do this type of stuff. Not necessarily a essential core functionality of the system, but I definitely encourage you to play around and try to make whatever is fun for you. Let's see, Jack Benson says, in a team setting, how would you encourage refactoring a project's structure away from a top-down ideological design to something that maps better to how the program will run in practice? How would you encourage refactoring structure away from a top-down ideological design to something that maps better to how it will run in practice? I'm not sure I understand this question. So how to change an existing project from the original top-down design to something that more closely matches reality? I think you're gonna have to phrase that in a different way so that I can understand it. Oh, and Daniel Anderson here with the super chat. Thank you very much. Keep up the good work, he says, with the $69 super chat. Very, very cool. Thank you very much. Or I should say nice. Nice. Saeed is asking, have you used C++ const_expr in the source code? Have I? Yes, we are heavy users of const_expr. If you get grep c const_expr, you will find, that's per file. We have in total 2,789 instances of const_expr. So yes, we use a lot of it. And const_expr is really nice. It's really nice to do things at compile time as much as possible, or as much as possible without like unpleasant contortions. And when you see like entire blocks of code just melt away from the compiled binary, and everything gets done at compile time instead, that's so cool. I love that. And It's really enjoyable to see like Jason Turner's presentations where he like uses Const Expert to make all the generated code go away. That's nice. So Joja is asking, are there plans for GPU hardware acceleration? And then Dernoyer correctly responds, there is no plan. And I would encourage everybody to check out the FAQ, which is linked and a pinned message in the chat, and also in the bottom left of the screen, hopefully, and in various places. Here you can find the typical questions that tend to come up every stream, and you can learn the answers. So Dieter is saying, do you recommend any books or resources to get started with kernel development? So I honestly haven't read a lot of books about this type of stuff. I did read the Tannenbaum book back in 2009, I think. And I didn't finish it. I read the first 25%, but it was interesting. I don't know that books are right for me, but they may be right for you. Depending on what type of person you are, you really need different types of resources. For me, I just want to get started hacking on something because I learn when I can manipulate code and see what changes. So I just need to get to a place where I can compile and then tweak and recompile and test. If you are able to take in a lot of information through reading without hacking at the same time, then I imagine that the typical like operating system development books are probably useful, like the Tannenbaum book, and then what's it called, Three Easy Pieces, which I haven't read. So I don't know. And obviously the operating OS Dev wiki is a classic, wikiosdev.org, which probably everybody knows about, but it's worth mentioning. The quality of articles on this site is extremely varied, but they do have enough stuff that anybody with a fair chunk of programming experience can learn enough on this website to build a complete operating system. You don't actually need anything other than this website. You can do everything with what they have here. Everything outside of that is like a bonus or a convenience, but you can do it with just that website. Let's see. Ty the Guy saying, hope you have a good weekend, Andreas. Well, I hope you have a great weekend too, Ty the Guy. Randy Tang is asking, how many browser tabs do you keep open at any given time on average? Mine is around 30. I think probably about 10. No more than 10. If I have more than 10 browser tabs open, then I start to just lose track of what I'm doing. So I try to close tabs or garbage collect tabs to keep focused. I like to maintain focus. Whatever I'm doing, I try to have a narrow scope of what I'm doing. And that's just part of that. Sicilian CPP says, what is your thought about Rust language growth? And some rumors says it will dominate C/C++ works. I have no thoughts about that. Alex Friedman says, do the SerenityIO libraries support both synchronous and asynchronous operations? It depends on what you mean by synchronous and asynchronous operations. We are asynchronous in the old POSIX sense, but we don't have anything like modern async IO POSIX APIs, and nothing like Linux's IOU ring or whatever it's called. But we do have sort of a basic callback mechanism based asynchronicity, where you set up a hook where that gets called when there's more data, and then you feed yourself that way. And most of our applications are written doing that, and internally it's POSIX select. Let's see. Yuan says, has anyone you've worked with previously talked about or contributed to SerenityOS? Yes, many, many people. There are many people that I have worked with previously who have worked on SerenityOS in the past or are doing it currently. And that's really nice. It's nice to be able to continue our friendship outside of the previous work projects. I think for me personally, I have a hard time maintaining friendships with people who I'm not working on something together with, because my head is always framed inside of some project, and when people go outside or leave that project, I sort of lose my handle to that person. And it's something that I used to feel bad about in the past, because I thought that you're not supposed to do this, or this is like a negative character flaw or whatever. But as I got older, I kind of accepted that this is just how I'm like, and that's okay. And I'm going to enjoy working on projects with people instead of beating myself up about not being great at maintaining friendships with people that I have nothing in common with anymore. Let's see. So Vitslab is asking, do you create tickets/tasks or just pick up whatever feels good to work on? I do both, but usually I just pick up whatever interests me at the moment or whatever bothers me at the moment. And this usually 100% of the time, there's something that bothers me in SerenityOS that is just, I just can't stand it and I have to fix it. So that's usually what I do. If it's something that, if I have too many of these things, then I start to write tickets and try to farm them out to other people. But usually I try to take responsibility for things that bother me and try to work on them myself, because I don't want to be this type of person who blames others for the system degrading in quality or like having issues. I think this is a system where personal responsibility is absolutely super duper important and absolutely vital for the success of the system. That if I'm not willing to take personal responsibility for the quality of the system, then how can I expect anybody else to do it? So I try to do that always. Let's see. Saeed is saying, I see nowadays there is a growing interest of the single translation unit build. Have you used it in any of your projects? Oh, you mean like mashing together all the C++ into a single CPP file? I have not used it in Serenity. I'm aware of the technique, and it's something that we used in WebKit to great effect. It was able to reduce build time substantially in WebKit, which the WebKit project suffers from extreme include graph explosion. I think like at one point we were doing some tests, and I think like just building an empty C++ file with some common headers included took multiple seconds, and that was not a good place. So they were able to get huge time savings on their build by just they don't do a single translation unit. I think they mash together source files into, I don't know, they do something like 30 C++ files into one C++ file or something like that. I don't know exactly how it's divided, but that's the technique. Pix3Dev says, a week or so ago, I started working on a new operating system. Do you have some advice that I should follow so that it could potentially, just in case, grow to something big as Serenity? Well, I think the the way to grow a project to this point is to just be extremely okay and committed to the fact that it's going to take you probably more than a decade to get the project where you want. I think because I've always been okay with that since I started this project, that I knew when I started that this is a project I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And by knowing that, by knowing that up front, it allowed me to just never get to that point where I start to question, like, oh, should I really keep going? Like, I'm getting tired of this and blah, blah, blah. And instead, I always knew that this was going to take forever. So I never need to have those discussions with myself or whatever, those doubts. And I think that's the most important thing I can tell you. And then, of course, there's a lot of specifics if you want to achieve some specific thing that the Serenity project achieves. But I think I acknowledge that there's a lot of luck in this as well. I think that that through like random exposure on websites like Hacker News and Reddit and things like that has gotten a lot of people to discover the system. And same thing with my YouTube channel, which has been a continuous source of people discovering the system. Or I don't know if we should call that luck, because I've been putting a lot of work into it, and I hesitate to conflate luck and hard work. But no, the most important thing is to understand and be okay with the fact that it's going to take forever. And then if you are okay with that, then you can just keep grinding forever, and eventually people will find it. And if they like it, they will see that, wow, this guy is serious. He's going to keep going forever. Let's stick around and maybe participate. But I don't know what your experience level is. So if this is like the first time that you're doing a big project, then it's also important to have realistic goals for yourself. And that's maybe the second advice I would give you, actually. So be okay with it taking forever and have realistic goals, and accept that it's going to be really bad for a long time. And then it's going to get slightly better, but not good. And it will take quite a long time before it's actually resembles something good. And you have to be okay with that, because you're going to run out of patience if you're not okay with that. Let's see. Richard Davidson says, first of all, I want to thank you for all the videos you make. It's been a huge inspiration for me. Well, I'm happy to hear that, Richard. That's awesome. So I can't find the answer to this, and it's bugging me. What does ACK mean? Yeah, that's a common question. The original name of ACK was the Agnostic Kit, and the name was supposed to mean that it's agnostic. You can use this both from user space and from the kernel. And if you look in, I think if we look in the very first commit, where I imported everything into one repository, you can see a tiny remnant of that name here in ACKit test. So the very first name was ACKit, or Agnostic Kit, but then it was shortened to just ACK, and that's where the name comes from. But there are many alternative theories for what the name stands for, and I do not take responsibility for those alternative theories. Let's see. Sicilian CPP says, I want to build C++ code runner editor for Linux. How could I add compiler? If I am using QCreator, do you know any tools which I can use for adding terminal compiler? It sounds like you want to build an integrated development environment. And then you want to add a terminal and compiler to it. I don't know. If you are building a KDE application, I know that they have, or at least used to have, a terminal widget that you could integrate easily with your own application. So IDEs like kdevelop and things like that, or Kate, the text editor, they embed a terminal. So if you're using KDE, then I think there's an embeddable terminal for that, but I haven't looked at KDE source code for over 10 years, so I'm very outdated. Let's see. VitsLab says, I always find it hard to start friendships at workplaces. Yeah. It can be hard. It really depends. Let's see. Andre Högberg says, this is a weird question maybe, but what color theme are you using in C-Line? That's not such a weird question. And I recently changed it by accident and ended up liking the new theme, but I don't remember what it's called. So let's figure that out. So apparently my appearance theme is called Xcode Dark. And wait, where do I even see the theme? It's like editor, general appearance. No? Okay, yeah, as you can see here, I'm super skilled at looking this up. Okay, one dark is what I'm using. Yeah. But I think this is the thing I accidentally changed recently. I used to have one dark here, and now it's Xcode Dark. But one dark I know I've been using in the past, and it's been a good looking theme. Let's see. Daniel asks, do you have to use GML or can you just directly code in C++ for GUI apps? You don't have to use GML, and it's sometimes more convenient to use C++ directly, especially if you are building the UI dynamically, then C++ tends to be the more convenient option. But for static UIs, GML is much more convenient. And you can also prototype your GML using the GML Playground application, or actually also now directly in Hack Studio. Masood says, is this a good idea if I pick C++ as primary language? Am I going to mess up? I don't think you're going to mess up. It's, C++ is a very powerful language that if you get good at C++, you will have endless opportunities for employment and for building software. But I don't know enough about your situation to say that picking up C++ at this moment in your life or career is the best possible thing you can do, but you're not going to mess up by getting good at C++. Let's see. Christopher says, I think luck is an important factor, but there are things you can do to increase your luck surface area. Yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. You buy more lottery tickets, right? Say that I want to promote Serenity. I post about it on Reddit. I post about it on Hacker News. I tweet about it. I post videos on YouTube. Each one of those is a lottery ticket, and it increases the chances that somebody sees the thing and discovers it and ends up liking it. If I don't do those things, people will still find it, but it will be slower. So that's definitely a good way of looking at it, to increase your luck surface area. Of course, I don't post about Serenity on Reddit or Hacker News anymore. I used to do that sometimes in the past, but I basically completely stopped, except for the occasional Reddit post. If I make a video, I share it on Reddit sometimes. But the growth of the audience got a little bit hectic for me for a while. And I struggled to I struggle a little bit to handle the huge amount of incoming communication. Um, so now, because I didn't actively work on growing for a while, it's slowed down, and that's nice. But maybe we can put some effort um, into reaching out to new people again. It's always it's fun when people who end up loving the project discover the project for the first time. That's always one of the best things when somebody shows up and finds all this cool stuff we have and they just immediately want to work on it. It's nice to see that happening. So Randy says, growing up, can you recall the most challenging, frustrating technical thing you had to learn, be it a language construct, OS concept implementation? How did you motivate yourself to continue? The most challenging technical thing I had to learn. I'm not sure what that would be. One thing I struggled with for a very long time, which you wouldn't think today, but I used to do only command line programming in C and C++, because as a child, I used Visual Basic and I made GUI everything. But then when I picked up C++ and C, I never learned to build GUIs. And then I kept ignoring that and sort of postponing learning it. And it got to a point where I was really comfortable with C++ and had basically no idea how to build even a simple GUI. And that was a huge source of kind of intimidation for me, that I tried to avoid that type of work. And if it ever came up professionally, I always try to get somebody else to take those tasks. And eventually, I guess I just grew tired of feeling so held back by this. And that was actually like early on in Serenity, when I built the original GUI toolkit for Serenity. This was part of the motivation, I think, or part of the drive that I had for building it, was I just want to know how to do this, and the best way I can learn how to do it is to just build a GUI framework, because then I will know exactly how it works, and I will be able to just fluently generate interfaces. Let's see. Neil says, you said that there are always multiple things that annoy you at any one time in Serenity. What's bugging you right now? That's a good question. So usually I don't even keep these things in my head, but when I want to figure out what's bugging me right now, I just boot the system and I open up the start menu, and then I wait for something to bug me, and I can immediately tell you that it bugs me that none of these menu entries have a keyboard shortcut. So if I were to press the R key, it doesn't activate the run option, because run is not underscored and doesn't have a shortcut. And if we were not doing this live stream right now, I would probably work on that. So that's just an example of how I find something that bothers me. Let's see. X7D says, do you have any advice for self-taught programmers getting their first jobs in programming related fields? Well, I guess my advice is to just keep learning and keep expanding your knowledge, because if you are self-taught, the thing that is the primary difference between self-taught programmers and like university educated programmers that I've noticed is that people who go to university tend to have a broader base of like data structures and algorithms knowledge. And if you're self-taught, it's very likely that you haven't been exposed to all kinds of data structures and algorithms. So you're going to have to do that work for yourself if you are self-taught. And I think um, making an effort to actively expand your computer science knowledge is a very, very good thing to do when you're self-taught. And I struggled for many years with feeling like, I guess, like an inferiority feeling that my coworkers who had studied computer science academically, that they just knew all these things that I didn't know. And it took me years before I realized that, I could just go and like learn these things on my own. Um, and then I sort of made a point to um, implement random data structures in my free time sometimes. And just by doing that, it made me more well-rounded, I think, and also just more comfortable with programming. And also it was just a lot of fun because I love programming. So there was literally nothing wrong with doing that. It just a great time all around with great benefits. Let's see. Je suis base? G suis base? I don't know how to say that. How do you feel about Serenity's desktop being more feature complete than GNOME and more stable than KDE? I don't think you are. I don't think you have an accurate concept of the stability of the Serenity desktop if you describe it in this way. See, Randy Tang with the $69 super chat saying, "I see what you did there, Daniel." I see what you were doing there too, Randy. That is very nice. Nice. Vitslab says, does Serenity leverage multi-core systems? So recently, that's something I've been working on recently. And as multi-core support is improving, but it's not yet stable enough to be enabled by default. And we can run with SMP on. You have to pass a special kernel argument to enable it, to enable multi-core. But there are quite many deadlocks, and the system like randomly freezes and unfreezes. So it's not suitable for day-to-day development yet. But the other day I was able to run 4 instances of the JavaScript test suite simultaneously, each on their own CPU, while playing Quake 2 at the same time. So that felt like it was like a stability high point that that I had never seen the system perform at before. So that was really positive. But there are many issues, and it's kind of hard to know what to do exactly to provoke the issues. But usually, if you run some tests and maybe browse the web or something, you can usually provoke some kind of deadlock or mishap. And then you just have to figure out what goes wrong. And now that I'm trying to provoke the system into crashing or hanging, it doesn't do it. Oh, finally, there we go. Okay, so we have a kernel panic. And it's something while trying to unlock a recursive spin lock, then we get some assertion failing. So this type of thing happens. And as you saw, we ran maybe like a minute or something. So obviously not stable enough for everybody to be living on this, but stable enough that people who are interested in debugging and fixing multi-core problems can definitely pick it up and try to help out with it if they're interested. This issue is actually weird. So it sounds like when I unlock the spin lock, then I'm on a different CPU than when I locked it. That doesn't sound good. Wait, why is that happening? Core dump, right. So take a spin lock at the start of core dump right, and then when we leave the scope, then we are running on a different CPU than when we started. Oh shoot, because these are writing out to files, which I guess may block or something. So we're blocking while holding a spin lock. That's gross. Okay, yeah, so there's probably some issue here. Maybe we shouldn't allow you to hold a spin lock while you block, or there are things like this that need to be figured out. Let's see. Leonardo says, how do you define what architecture to be used to implement a feature in Serenity? So usually we just go sort of play by ear, and we just start with something, whatever architecture seems natural. And if we're building a GUI of some kind, the architecture kind of reveals itself through the interface very often, because you have to define sort of, this is what the window looks like, these are the controls. And then it's often very natural to like, oh, what kind of data does this UI need to present? Okay, well, it's a music player and has a playlist that you can open. Okay, well, that playlists need to have a list of tracks and so on, and they need to have order, and you kind of discover the architecture by building it. But very often the architecture is not right from the beginning. So we just, at least my policy is always to just start building something and then discover the architecture along the way, and then iterate and adapt and improve the architecture if we learn that, oh, this could be better in some other way. Like in my last video about profile events, for example, where I discovered that I had been building a stupid API for registering strings, where I made the caller allocate a string ID instead of letting the kernel do it. That sort of, I started with one architecture and then discovered that it was kind of silly along the way, and then I adapted, improved the API, and saw all the improvements. And I thought that was such a great little microcosm of like that architectural iteration that I managed to capture in my last video. I really liked how that turned out. Let's see. Daniel says, do you play games? If so, what is your favorite game studio or game? I do play some games, not frequently lately, but I recently got a game gifted to me by my brother. My brother got me the Zelda Skyward Sword HD re-release or whatever, so I've been playing that. But since I started working on Serenity, the time I spend on games has been dramatically cut down. And I don't necessarily have a favorite game studio, but I think my favorite game of all time is probably either The Last of Us or Ori and the Blind Forest. Let's see. Ewan is asking, are you still happy dancing on new sponsors with Mrs. Kling? Yes. I do. Every time that somebody signs up for my Patreon or GitHub sponsors, or when I get a donation through PayPal, I always go and make a small and silly dance for my wife. And then she says, congratulations. And then it's a very nice ritual that we have. We've been doing it since very early on, and some days it's a lot of dancing, other days less, but we always do it. Let's see. Martin says, have you ever been thinking of rewrite? I don't understand this question. Max Joker says, what applications in Serenity could use scripting support, if any? How about scripting in the kernel? NetsBSD has Lua in kernel. I don't know about that. I think if an application needs scripting support, then you kind of discover that. But we're still at the point where we're adding basic functionality to our applications. So I think scripting probably comes later when you have basic functionality, and then you look for ways to expand on that. But I don't know. Rider Hitchhike says lock plus block equals boom. Yeah, I certainly agree. Pallav says, I've found people recommending the course NAND to Tetris to somebody who wants to learn operating systems from the scratch. What would you like to suggest here? So I've never done NAND to Tetris. I haven't read it or anything or completed it, but the basic concept sounds really, really good if you are interested in learning the stuff, you know, comprised by NAND to Tetris. So I think for anybody who's interested, they should totally do that. And likewise with the Ben Eater breadboard computer stuff, like if that appeals to you, then I think you should absolutely do it because it sounds like an awesome project. VitsLab says, there is so much potential for YouTube content. I would binge watch your debugging videos. Sometimes I don't understand what's going on, but low context issue like deadlock is perfect. Yeah, so I don't know about that type of video content because in a perfect world, this would be enjoyable content. But in reality, what I look like when I debug a deadlock is I'm just staring at like a log file for an hour and scratching my head and adding random print statements and then finally saying, oh, and that's it. So I think if I had to narrate or like provide interesting commentary at the same time, I don't know how that would go. At the same time, I don't want to reject something that I haven't tried, so I should try it. Let's see. Victor says, do you feel uncomfortable while coding, or this is an enjoyable process for you? Could you describe? Because when I code, it's very exhausting for me. Am I not cut out for it or just lack of knowledge? I do not feel uncomfortable while programming. I feel very comfortable. This is when I feel the most comfortable, I think. But it's something that improves with experience because it can be very frustrating to do programming when you don't yet have the skill to express what you imagine in your head through code. But by building your experience to the point where you're comfortable typing out your ideas and they actually come out correctly, the journey of getting to that point is an amazing journey. And once you get to that point, you're like a powerful Jedi or something that you can just mind control the computer into doing what you want. That's really, really awesome. So I definitely recommend getting yourself to that point if you enjoy it at all. Let's see. Theodore says, The Last of Us is amazing. Yes, I agree. It's an amazing game. It's a shame they never did a sequel to it. But The Last of Us, great game. Randy says, Andreas said he only eats fried vegetables with cottage cheese. Well, it's not the only thing I eat. It's just that I eat that specifically once a day at least. I also eat other food outside of that. I just have a specific meal that I make every day because I like the macronutrients and I like the continuity of always eating the same thing. Max Joker says, I was thinking about scripting things like packet filters / mangling, or things like complex GUI elements that can be created using scripts. Right. So that's definitely something that can be done. We've had some ideas about automating the GUI in the past, and we've had the most of the infrastructure for doing it in place, but I think we discovered that nobody actually wants to do anything with it, so it kind of bit rotted a bit. Um, but I don't think it's a bad idea necessarily. It's just that sometimes something seems like such a great idea, and then you add the feature, and then you discover that nobody's using it or nobody cares about it. And certainly that was the case with me. Like I thought that, oh, if we just make the GUI programmable, then I'm gonna do all kinds of things with that. But then I didn't do that. Just like I thought, if we have a visual GUI builder where I can drag out the GUI elements, then I'll use that all the time. But I never did. And I try to be strict about these things and honest in that if I realize that, okay, this thing that I thought I was going to use, I'm not actually using it. It's time to get rid of it. So we've been doing, I've been removing things from Serenity that seemed like a good idea to me in the past, but I just ended up not using. But when it comes to packet filtering, I think that's definitely an area where you would want something like a simple bytecode or something like that, because obviously you need to be able to support like simple filtering rules with various conditions and stuff. So you need to have some way of describing those. But I don't necessarily know that having a fully fledged scripting language is the right solution for that, or if you want more of a bespoke, targeted, domain-specific bytecode language. I don't know, because I've never built that kind of thing. So if we build it, we'll figure out what we need. Let's see, German WTB says, I just came across the opacity property in the terminal widget and cannot for the life of me figure out how it propagates. Oh, that's a good question. I don't even remember how that works, so let's look into it together. Opacity. Okay, so you can set the opacity of a terminal widget, and we ignore no ops, and then we call window set has alpha channel. So I think that's how it propagates, in that it sets the opacity. Wait. We give the window an alpha channel if the opacity is less than full. Okay. And then we remember the opacity and M opacity. And then when we update, we cause a paint event to come our way. And then where do we use the opacity? It's here. So when we are clearing the terminal at the start of the paint event, we, when filling with background color, we apply the opacity as alpha to the background color that we use to clear the terminal. So that's how it propagates. Or I don't know actually what you mean by propagates, if you just mean by like how does it end up as the opacity. But yeah, terminal widget set opacity, this is how it works. So it makes sure that the window has an alpha channel, because Windows by default do not have an alpha channel. Windows by default are 3-channel RGB, 8 bits each. But if you call set alpha has alpha channel true, then you get a 4th channel, 8-bit alpha, and the window will then take that into account. Let's see. Meep says, they made The Last of Us 2 last year. I do not recognize that fan fiction as a real sequel. Let's see. Diegor says, would it even be possible to support NVIDIA cards on Serenity, since NVIDIA drivers are 100% proprietary and made by NVIDIA? Well, anything can be figured out, right? Like there have been open source NVIDIA drivers outside of the proprietary driver for over a decade. So somebody figured out how to do it. Things can always be reverse engineered. And I think it is possible, but it would take a bunch of work. And if somebody wants to try doing it, then I encourage them to try. I have absolutely no idea how much is documented, but I imagine that you could probably learn a lot from how the Linux open source NVIDIA driver is implemented. And if it's GPL, I don't even know if it's GPL, I assume it's GPL, then maybe somebody could figure out how it works and then explain it to somebody else, and then that other person is able to write a non-GPL driver. But I don't know. That's something for somebody to look into if they're interested. Elise says, just throw JavaScript at it. Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the modern programming way, right? Like just use the web stack. Just implement the kernel packet filter as an Electron app. Let's see. Leonardo says, most parts of the features implemented on Serenity are heavily inspired by other operating systems. Is there a feature that you want to implement that you never saw in any other operating system? I don't know. Not really. I just want to implement an operating system that is simple and takes you seriously and does everything without unnecessary like bells and whistles, and looks really good at the same time. I'm not really here to experiment with random ideas. I know that's a constant source of disappointment to some people, that, oh, why doesn't Serenity try to break the mold in arbitrary ways? But this isn't really that type of project. This is a project where we implement like well-tested, well-understood abstractions to build something beautiful for ourselves. It's not experimental technology in the same way that maybe other systems aspire to be. Dustin Brett says, great work, Andreas. You were an inspiration for me to attempt my own YouTube channel to make an operating system with JavaScript. Oh, that's so cool. Dustin Brett. Where do we find that? Dustin Brett YouTube. Could this be you? This looks like you. Build Windows with React. All right, I'm gonna link this channel in the chat here if people want to check out Dustin's channel about building an operating system with JavaScript, which sounds like very interesting concept, and something I would never do myself because it's so far from what I want to build. But if somebody enjoys that type of thing, then I'm really happy about it. Let's see. Kashav says, how much is your salary? So my salary, as Paul says here, I live off of the donations that people make to Serenity, and people who support me on Patreon and GitHub sponsors. So that is actually one of the first questions on my FAQ. What is my job? Is that I'm working on SerenityOS full time. So my salary is very varied, and it's probably less than most people, but it is enough to survive, and I hope that it will continue growing. It's been on a good trend, and I really appreciate all the support that I get, and I never take it for granted, because this is a very unique and interesting position that I'm in. We're building a very unusual project here. So I really appreciate that so many people put their faith in me by supporting me. And the fact that I'm able to do this full time is a little bit unbelievable, but I am doing it. So it's super thank you to everybody who's supporting me, definitely. Um, it really warms my heart every time I think about it. Very cool. Anyway, let's see. Devashish says, does Serenity benefit from vector instructions? Does the fact that it runs on top of QEMU cause no trouble? So we compile with SSE support enabled, but we don't really make use of vector instructions. It's something that we should do. We should absolutely implement, for example, alpha blending with SSE or something like that to just get faster transparent windows. Because right now that's it's implemented in C++, completely unoptimized, and it could be a lot faster. But even there, we haven't really had something that runs slowly enough to motivate somebody to go and build an SSE or SIMD vector instruction alpha thing. And there are a bunch of other things that could be done with vector instructions as well. I think it's important to wait for bottlenecks to reveal themselves as real bottlenecks before putting time into optimizations that use them, because basically anytime that you use something like vector instructions, you are making the code less portable, less readable, harder to refactor. So you need to be really sure that you are doing something high value. So yeah. But does the fact that it runs on QEMU cause any trouble? I don't think so. We use the KVM support in QEMU, which is basically a thin layer on top of your actual CPU. So of course, if it's not available, then it's using an emulated CPU. And I think we have had some problem in the past with a bug in the QEMU emulated version of the CPU. It had some floating point bug or something like that. That was then troubling us for a short while until it was fixed in a QEMU update. And we have also had some problems with the mouse emulation in QEMU, that sometimes the emulated mouse gets out of sync in a way that doesn't seem to happen with real hardware. But the problems have been very few and far between. Dan Taylor says, hey, I love your project, dude. Absolutely incredible stuff. Thank you. I love the project too. I'm very, very proud of it, and very, very proud of everybody who works on it. Let's see. Bharat Gaming says, hello, how are you? I am great. Hello, Bharat Gaming. Welcome to the stream. We have about 5 minutes left, so if we have any smaller questions, now is a good time. Larger questions will be hard to get into at this point, but I'm happy to take some smaller ones. Yegor says, what are some of the reasons Windows subsystem for Linux with QEMU on Windows so slow? I do not know. I don't have that much experience using WSL. I used it a bit at my previous job, but it is just seems like it's just slower than using Linux natively. Let's see. Bharat Gaming says, how to increase subscribe. Okay. Ivan says, which compilers are available on SerenityOS? So there are no compilers available by default because we don't have a compiler, and we only put things that we make ourselves into the default build. But we have ports of a couple of different compilers. I think we have, let's just look in the ports directory. I know we have GCC, And we also have TCC, I think, Tiny CC. So those are the two C compilers. And then we also have a bunch of other languages like Python, PHP. I know there's Lua and a bunch of random toy languages. Obviously, we have our own JavaScript engine and our own shell language. Let's see. Victor says, did you ever do web development? Yes, I did. It was one of my first jobs that I ever had. I was a web developer working at a small business in Sweden and doing web pages for local companies. So some of the pages I was doing was like a company that sells socks and t-shirts. And there was some other company that would put your company name on a golf ball, and you could buy like many golf balls with your company name on it. That was the thing that they did, and they wanted a web page, so I worked on that. So very modest things. And it was one of my first jobs, as I said, and this was back in 2003, 2004, something like that. Good times. And it was the reason that I learned PHP and SQL databases. Antti says, hobbyist coder here. I made a course enrollment system with JavaScript. I find coding fun, but testing really tedious and more difficult. What is your approach to testing code for production? Well, it varies really, like depending on what you're doing. With Serenity, we don't really go into production yet, so we don't have an established like final testing procedure for making a release or something like that. But generally, I like to have a combination of micro and macro tests. So unit tests, typical unit tests are like the micro tests where you're just like testing individual C++ interfaces and stuff like that. And then you also want to have macro tests, which do like high level operations and verify that the outcome is good. And the strongest macro test suite we have on Serenity is the JavaScript engine test suite, which ends up exercising a whole bunch of subsystems because the JavaScript engine is like it builds on so many of the system abstractions, and very often if you break something underneath it, it's pretty good at fleshing out problems. I think as we expand the browser testing, that will become an even better macro test suite because it also, unlike JavaScript, it also involves the graphics system. So I think that will be very good to expand. We already have some web testing, but it's still non-graphical, unfortunately. But I guess my personal approach to testing is to try to combine micro and macro tests, so unit tests and more like high-level integration tests. Let's see, Leonardo with the super chat. Thank you. Thank you, Leonardo, for the super chat. Very, very nice. Thank you. Paul Fragaman says, is one of your web pages from that time still up? No, I don't think so. I looked for them once on the Internet Archive and I couldn't find a single one of them. I think we were not very good at search engine optimization back then, so they didn't even get crawled by the Internet Archive. Andy says, what do you think about when deciding to port something or write it yourself? Well, at this point, I think the things I would port are games, like old games and things like that, where, oh, I love Diablo. I want to play Diablo. I don't want to recreate Diablo because Diablo is like a specific thing. And I just want to bring that to the system. Whereas I don't, if I wanted to have Vim, for example, we already have a port of Vim, but I like that we are building Vim mode into our text editor instead, because I don't necessarily want to have Vim, the software package. I would rather build that functionality into our software. So I think, I don't know, that's not a great answer actually, but I think really I'm not particularly interested in importing anything anymore unless it's some software that I have an emotional connection to, like a game that I loved as a kid or something like that. Alex Gravenor says, Serenity does software blitting right. Yes, that is right. At what resolution does that become too slow? I don't know, actually. Let's crank it up here and see what happens. Monitor. Let's crank it up to the max. 1440p. Okay, now we are, this is as high as it goes in Serenity at the moment. I don't know, let's do the fire. Wait, the fire demo? Oh, there we go. So that works. And like, I don't know when it becomes too slow, but I guess it is a little bit sluggish, but that's also like CPU usage and stuff. But as you can see, like you can blit and have UI, the basic UI performs at a reasonable level, even at this super high resolution. So I think if we were to do like UI animations and things like that, it might be more noticeable that we're blitting so much, but yeah, it's an interesting question. And that's why I was saying earlier that if we want to optimize blitting by doing SIMD versions of the alpha blending code and stuff like that, then there's a lot of room to improve this, because it's very naive blitting code. It's not even optimized. Let's see. Gregory Mann says, have you considered porting Age of Empires? I haven't considered that. Maybe that would be fun. I don't have the source code for it, so I don't know how I would do that. But I guess you're talking about, yeah, like an open source cross-platform engine. So that's what we would port in that case. But I always find this question format, like, have you considered something? I find that kind of difficult to answer because I can say yes or no, but what is it really that you're looking for? Like, okay, no, I have not considered doing that. Victor says, Diablo 2 Resurrected is launching in 1 hour. If you pre-purchase it, you can play, I guess. Well, I assume if I purchase it, I would be able to play. Otherwise, it seems like a really bad deal. And FFS Ray says, I know you're mainly a C++ developer, but have you ever heard of Zig and it being used as a C replacement? Yes, I have heard of Zig, and I've been learning a little bit of Zig, and I don't have an opinion about Zig that's worth hearing because I haven't written enough of it. Okay, last question that we'll take today is from Yegor. How does the I/O delay function work? Let's go look at it. I/O delay. So as you can see here, what it does is takes as an input a number of microseconds that we want to delay, and then we just have a loop where we read from the input port hex 80 that many times. And the way this is, the concept, the idea here is stolen from the Linux kernel, where they use a similar thing to induce a delay. And I learned about this while building my own x86 emulator. So I learned about this a long time ago. And at first I couldn't figure out why do they keep reading from this port? I don't even know what that port is. And then when I read the Linux source code, I realized, they just read from it over and over so that, because the CPU I/O instruction has like a delay, right? It takes a certain time to run. So by just doing that in a loop, you can create a delay with a specific time. Now, I'm not at all sure that this is accurate to microseconds anymore. Some people say that it is, but I have never actually verified that this will give you that many microseconds of delay. And I suspect that when we're running in QEMU, it seems unlikely that this would actually be a microsecond, because when you do an IO instruction in QEMU, then it has to go and like look up the ports and their port mappings and stuff. So probably we are delaying much more than necessary on QEMU, and this would possibly be a microsecond on hardware, but I haven't tested. Anyways, that will be the last question for today. So this is the end of the stream. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming and hanging out. I really, really appreciate all the engagement, all the awesome questions, and all the super chats. So thank you all for coming. And actually, let me look one thing up real quick. I think this weekend is Lang Jam, isn't it? Oh no, it's next week. Next week. Okay, so next week, if you're interested in making programming languages, my friend JT is doing a language jam, the first inaugural Lang Jam, where you build a new programming language over a weekend, and they're going to announce a theme for the language next Friday. So if you're interested, check out Lang Jam on GitHub. I'll put a link to that. It's sort of like Game Jam, but for programming languages instead. So next weekend. Anyways, that's it for today. So thank you all very much for coming, and I hope that you all have a great weekend doing whatever you do. And maybe I'll see you all in the SerenityOS Discord. Otherwise, I will see you next time.